Welcome to the Fleet Roaming Podcast. I'm Dan.
And I'm Marlene.
So today we have the first part of a two-part episode that we're bringing you because we had a conversation, a really great conversation with our friends, Aimee and Chase of Tight Loops. And we had such a great conversation that we just kept going and going and going.
Yeah.
So it ended up being 3 hours long. And rather than making you sit through a 3-hour episode, which we feel like we're doing a lot already with an hour and a half, a 90-minute episode, we're breaking it up into two parts. If you guys don't know Chase and Aimee, they're a couple of creatives, filmmaker, photographer, full-time traveler, just all around interesting people and really great, amazing. We met them in 2022 at our first Overland Expo that we went to in Flagstaff. Back then, they were in a Volkswagen Vanagon that they had been in for a few years. We talked to Aimee quite a bit when we first met, but Chase was underneath the Vanagon the entire time.
We only saw his feet.
We saw a lot of his feet, But we got to know them a lot better through some subsequent travels. We were in Baja with them for a few days back in early 23, before we took the ferry over. So if you guys don't know who they are, they have a YouTube channel. It's called Tight Loops Fly. They are fly fishermen,
Fisher people.
man and woman. They're skaters. They're a lot of things.
They're super talented is basically
They're very
what they are.
talented people. Yeah, so we're super glad to have met them and now can call them our friends. So this first part is going to be mostly about how they met, how they grew up, who they are, and how they became creative people, their experiences, going to school in the creative field, and just a bunch of probably interjections from things that come through our heads as we converse. You'll find that they are a lot more than it seems on the surface when you start talking to them. We've always found them as very interesting people, which is why I wanted to talk to them. But this is the first 90 minutes, and then, we'll come back, and for the second part, we'll explain to you what that's about. So here you go. Enjoy this first part of our interview with Tight Loops with Chase and Aimee. We got you up too early today. We
Where
apologize.
Are you guys? No, don't worry about it. Honestly, we have so much to do. It's like the sleep schedule has been getting later and later the more we're in the house, because we just keep working till like midnight, and then we start watching TV, and then we go to bed at like later. Later. We need to start getting the sleep schedule in a different direction. So,
I find that we do the same. And in fact, I feel like I've always felt like that I was designed for like 25-hour days. Because as a 25-hour day cycle, I wouldn't stay up an hour later every day. I go to bed at the same time every day. But then again, maybe I end up needing 26 hours in that case.
I think it just extends on. I think Chase and I definitely
we're the same way.
I've always been a late riser. I've never been like an early morning person, and I have all this weird anxiety built up from my grandparents, really, from going to visit my grandparents during the summer and being a teenager and sleeping really late. And like, if you weren't up at 6 a.m., you were not you're not pulling your weight. You were not doing what you need to be doing. My grandmother is like a 5 a.m. riser every day, and I have so much anxiety about sleeping late.
Wow.
And whenever anyone asks us to like have a call or do something early in the morning, especially on different time zones, I'm always like, yeah, that's fine. We can talk.
You get flashbacks of your grandma.
But I'm definitely like I need 9 hours of sleep. Like, I need a lot of sleep. I have learned that about myself.
I would like to have 9 hours for sure.
Yeah.
If that was a choice, and often we do, because like you guys, we're not going to a 9 to 5, right? So we can kind of make the schedule that we want. It's just you still got to keep that paycheck coming in somehow. So having to
for
be
us-
self-motivated is tricky.
I'd say Chase and I don't have a lot of paychecks coming in, so it makes it really easy to sleep as much as we want.
If only somebody paid for us to go to sleep, we'd be rich.
But where are you guys now?
So, I mean,
We're in Cartagena.
yeah, we're in Colombia. We've actually been in Colombia for like almost a month.
Yeah.
And we've been in this same place for almost a month. This time it's not because of our van's delayed, it's because our friend's van is delayed, and they made this new rule like within the last couple of years. Mostly I think is because of electric cars catching on fire on these ro-ro ships. And they had us take out our battery from our van, and we had to ship it through a container ship. And our friends happened to be shipping on a container ship, so we put our battery in their van. And because we have no battery, even though we've had our van for like 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks,
Can't go anywhere, yeah.
still can't go anywhere. And it's like 100 degrees outside every day, so we can't just go camping nearby.
Yeah.
So we're trying to make the best of it.
Yeah, so we're in this like high rise with like windows everywhere. So if we did this like in the afternoon, the sun would just be beating on us.
Yeah, because we're like at a sort of where does the
I
sun
don't
set?
know, but it's like,
This way.
and there's no like curtains to really hide it, which is
Yeah.
weird. But
Where are you guys?
Yeah.
Are you guys in Butte?
We're in Butte at my folks / grandfather's house. I feel like you guys need to put your kids to work. Everyone get out and push. We don't need a battery. You guys got a
They
lot.
can still drive. They just have no way.
I mean, the car
The
runs.
Yeah,
The
they just
car
have no
runs.
way.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Does that mean like no
I mean,
refrigerator?
we could do it. We could use it like a
Yeah.
glorified tent.
no fan.
Yeah.
no
Yeah,
lights.
but it's the fan. The fan's the big problem. Yeah, we
yeah.
have lanterns.
Now we sound like glampers.
I know. We are.
You're like, it's too hot in the fan everywhere,
We
but
are.
honestly, I would be doing the same
I
thing.
mean,
100 degrees with
Yeah.
humidity.
yeah, no.
No.
By
we're
the way,
amongst
I
friends that have fancy campers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We understand.
I
Also, you have cats. You know, that's a big factor.
That's right. It's totally for the
Yeah,
cats.
cook
It's
the
not for
cats.
us.
You cook the cat.
We would suffer if it wasn't for the cats. Is this the house you grew up in, Chase?
No, so when I was 2.5, my family moved to Israel, and I grew up in Israel for 13 and a half years. I came back my sophomore year of high school to the
Okay.
States. But even before we moved from the States, my folks had moved to Oregon, which is where I was born. This is the home that my mother grew up in. It's
I
your
see.
dad's place. And
So you
your
never
dad's-
lived in Butte until after you're just about an adult.
I've never officially lived in Butte except for now, which we barely
technically live in
officially
Butte.
live in Butte either. But our vehicle's registered here, so I guess we're technically residents
Yeah.
of Butte. But
I mean, people try hard to get their cars registered in Montana. So having that, just ready to go, it's pretty nice.
We have a lot of people
You
who
don't have
come
to
up to
start
us
an
and
LLC
say,
or anything.
where they're like, "Are you an LLC or do you live in Montana?" And I was like, "Both."
Right.
Kind of. But we live in this truck.
Yeah.
Technically both. But they're like,
Right.
okay.
but yeah, with that said, in the summers, we'd always come back to the States, even when we were living in Israel, and we always spent a month or two of the summer here in Butte. So Butte does feel like kind of a home base, even though I never lived here. A lot of my American experience growing up was in Montana and in Butte.
Okay. So it's your grandparents it's your mom's side that have always lived in Montana.
My dad was actually born in Montana too, but my dad was adopted.
Oh.
And his adoptive parents, his dad built power substations for the government, which meant they moved like every 4 to 6 months to go build a new power substation somewhere. So my dad was adopted in Helena, Montana. Coincidentally, my parents met in Seattle, 35 years
Helena
later.
is like 40 minutes from Butte.
Yeah, there's a weird Montana connection with my dad too, but because my dad moved around so much, also he lived in Helena from like 0 to 2 years old or whatever, and then lived all over the country. So he know more than me. He was adopted from an orphanage in Helena, so he know more than me can say that like he grew up in Montana or something. But.
Chase's like family lineage here is like 5th generation of living in Butte. So.
Wow, you're like your family's like the Duttons from Yellowstone.
Right.
Essentially, yeah.
It would be like, and I would be able. I'm technically
maybe not the millions of acres of land, but
well,
but I don't know. Maybe you have that too.
Yeah, I would technically be the 5th generation Montanan, but I will never be able to claim that in the eyes of Montanans because I wasn't technically born here. It doesn't even if I had moved back a week later after being born, I would never be considered a native Montana. To Montanans, people are very strict.
That's
sensitive.
Yeah.
Basically, if you're not from Montana, you might as well be from California. So they're like very aggressive about that. The rivalry.
With as many Californians that have flooded everywhere, into the, mostly I guess in the western states, anywhere but California, I think the animosity is felt like for sure in Oregon too.
Yeah.
We know a lot of people in Oregon that feel that way about Californians going there. In Arizona, even Texas, Washington, Idaho, especially bad lately. But, where else has empty space? Like Mars. I think some people go to Mars.
Yeah. I mean, the whole thing is kind of like a funny thing to be angry about. Like people from a specific state moving to your state. It's like California's just really big and there's a lot of people there. It's just, it's not really that different.
Yeah.
Like, we'll move to California.
It's funny because we're running out of stuff to watch since we're stuck here for so long. So we just started watching Yellowstone.
Yeah.
Like a week ago, actually. So you can see that whole storyline. Have you guys seen any of it?
We haven't.
Yeah, we've watched. We watched a couple episodes of the 1883 or
1923. I don't know.
Oh yeah, right.
Oh,
the
there's all these spinoffs.
And like they had the whole downtown like blocked off, and people with carriages, and we were here. I'm like trying to get to like the courthouse to go like register my vehicle, and like I can't get through because there's like a movie set happening.
It was actually.
Was it because Butte is like?
Because it
Butte's
looks
like one of the few
old.
cities there that still looks real.
Yeah.
It looks. It's like a time capsule. Everything is kind of preserved.
The big scandal is that it was shot here in Butte to represent
old time
Bozeman, because Bozeman doesn't look like that anymore, but Butte still does. And there's a big rivalry between Butte and Bozeman.
Not surprising.
People call it Bose Angeles.
Montanans just need reasons to fight, right? There's just whatever they can fight about. They're gonna, if it's with somebody else or if it's with each other, you just need reasons to fight somebody.
Now.
It was bad enough that it was shot in Butte and not recognized as Butte, but then to be passed off as Bozeman was like the ultimate scandal.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
Butte also famously likes
Bozeman's full of Californians anyways.
Exactly. And Butte likes to be recognized as Butte America, not even Butte, Montana. It's Butte America.
Oh, really? Huh.
Yeah.
I just learned the other day that what used to be known as the oldest Chinese restaurant in the country used to be in Butte, but I just learned that they've been superseded by another restaurant in California of all places. So
super.
I don't know. Another reason to fight.
If they're talking about the Pekin House, I've eaten there. It's not good.
No, I don't imagine it is very good.
Horrendous. And it's like kind of a long running joke in the family now that it's just I'd rather have a peanut butter and jelly. And I love.
But you know what? I feel like that's even more impressive, being so bad and it's still in operation.
You should get a special.
Yeah, that's like they've worked really hard.
I think it's probably actually good from a more traditional Chinese
East Coast Chinese food.
What we've come to know as American like garden variety Chinese takeout food is not what this food is. It's very, very different. It's very simple. It's just like slices of
pork on some like spaghetti noodles.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it kind of goes back. It kind of goes back to maybe their like long-running heritage of being around for so long that their recipes are from days when they couldn't get the authentic ingredients.
Yeah, totally.
Right. So now they just kind of
they had.
Our people here like this spaghetti noodle stir fry, so let's just keep making it. Yeah. It's 2024, but
yeah.
Compared to the California culture around Asian cuisine, the East Coast immigrant culture around different cuisine, eating that, I was like,
yeah.
This.
But
what is this?
We have had to adapt since we left the US traveling around. That is most of the Asian food that we eat. It's so unauthentic and makeshift with ingredients they can find.
Yeah.
Pekin House is probably still better than what we can find here in Cartagena.
Yeah.
We had some really bad.
Yeah.
We had some sushi the other day, because we can get sushi delivered to this apartment for all 5 of us, more than enough with leftovers, delivered for $40.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a ton of stuff, ton of food that comes. But then it shows up. It's okay. Wow, this is one of these tempura rolls that's deep fried, and we cut it open. It's it's a piece of breaded fried chicken on the inside, rolled out with rice.
It's like a KFC roll.
Yeah.
That's so.
But you know what? As long as we got some hot sauce, we got some
When we were in Argentina, when we were in Buenos Aires specifically, when we went back to the city, we would be getting food from different restaurants. And I know Mac and Owen, when we came back from El Calafate, they got sushi. I was really sick, and we were gonna go get sushi with them, but we ended up getting Indian food, which was okay. It wasn't terrible, but it was okay. But Mac and Owen got the sushi, and I noticed on every sushi menu, it's mostly cream cheese. That's what they're putting in every single sushi roll. And Mac and Owen were like, dude, it was so bad. So much cheese.
Cream cheese is an ingredient for some American style sushi rolls. They're the Philly roll.
Right. They took it over the top, it sounds
roll,
like.
Maybe sometimes have it. But I think they're going to put on everything. Exactly. Yeah. So, you have to take it with a grain of salt how authentic it is or how much they claim it is. But once you're gone for so long like we have, it was still refreshing. We figured out what we really should be doing. We should be going out and getting arepas on the street, which we did the other night, and we're we should have been eating this the whole time.
Yeah.
Instead
of
ordering.
Get burnt out though. You need something to break up the, food you're eating all the time. You just gotta take a risk, and sometimes the risk pays off, and sometimes it doesn't. It's a good story though.
But this is also, while we're here in an apartment, if we're gonna have stomach problems, this is the place to have it.
Oh yeah.
So
with some comforts.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
So, but anyways, we're hoping to leave actually Sunday.
Yeah.
So our friend's container just arrived 2 days ago, and he just drove it off of the rack that it's in. So now you just have to get it cleared, and then we'll get our battery back hopefully Saturday, and then put the van back together and find someplace cooler. That's the goal.
So our plan is to hopefully be leaving tomorrow morning.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah, so we're in
Awesome.
the final stretch of packing. When we come back to Butte, I really like to deep clean the truck inside and out, try to get a good baseline, take everything out that is either needs to be cleaned or we're not sure is going to stay in the truck. I take all of our clothes out, everything under the bed, vacuum out all the spaces. So the unpacking is a multi-day process, and then the repacking is even longer because at that point we're reconsidering all the different components. We added a lot of camera gear this time around, so there's a lot of different footprints of storage things, different cameras. We need to figure out what goes where. And every time we come back, this is the longest we went without coming back to Montana and swapping out gear. Last August we left in the truck, and then we came back in the middle of April. So it was a pretty big stint with we had no pack rafts with us. We had a lot of things that we had left behind thinking we don't need it for this portion of our season. And then, in March, we're in California trying to figure out, ship the pack rafts, what do? We want to do all these things. So not being able to go back and change the gear is it's a big part of what makes it more functional, so that we don't have to be super crowded in that space. So yeah, the repacking process has started. We just got new pack rafts. We have a bunch of new camera gear, and we are, I'd say, 60% there. We have to figure out boat things, and like a lot of stuff, figuring out the storage is also figuring out how can we store this without damaging it, like things that shake and rub in the truck.
It's going to be rough on some of those roads.
Yeah, so that we don't wear holes in the boats and things like that. So there's just a lot of thinking that has to happen, and Chase and I like running things by each other. What do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? How does this fit? This doesn't fit there. That needs to stay. This needs to go. You know, and so it takes a long time.
Inevitably, you end up dialing stuff in once you're actually out there. But the biggest like nuisance is if you brought something that then
that
you're
you
like,
don't need, or
I don't need this. I have nowhere for it, and now it's just floating around wherever until we can like mail it.
You're not willing to like get rid of it. Right, you want to keep it for another trip or in storage. Yeah. Oh, I know. So, we have a lot of that kind of stuff.
Well,
in fact, we're taking some of our time here to do that too. Now, ours has to be moved out of the van and then up. Originally 11 luckily they have elevators in this one, but had they not had elevators, it'd be like 1,000 pounds of gear that has to come up the stairs. But I want to talk more about your trip to Alaska, and more importantly, as you know me, I'm into gear, so we'll talk more about your new gear too later. But let's talk, Chase. How did your family end up going to Israel? What was that connection?
Well, okay, it's kind of a long story. It's a little bit complicated.
Depends on how much you know about world. Right? I know you have 40% more packing to do, but whatever time you want is there.
The cliff notes are my parents are members of a religion called the Baha'i Faith. The Baha'i Faith's organizational body center is in Israel, is in Haifa on Mount Carmel. Similar to, what Jerusalem is to Christians and Jews, or Mecca to Muslims, or Salt Lake City to the Mormons. Haifa is sort of the epicenter for the Baha'is. My dad's a psychologist, and he was invited to come be the sort of resident community psychologist. So there's it's hard to say this without it sounding instantly culty, but there's a religious community of Baha'is who are, international, living in Israel. There's people from all over the world who are Baha'is who come there to live at the World Center, Baha'i World Center in Haifa, for basically to live in the community, but they all work and serve normal roles there. They have whatever jobs. It's not like it's not a missionary type establishment. In fact, it's actually forbidden in the Baha'i faith to teach the Baha'i faith to the Israelis. So it's not there to like spread the word of the Baha'i faith. That's just sort of where the like I said, organizational body and center is, and there's a big community of people there who all keep that running, and they have their various jobs there. My dad's job was to be the community psychologist, because he was established and renowned psychologist. When we moved back to the States, he taught clinical psychology at university. Or whatever. He was a credentialed person who also happened to be Baha'i, so he was invited to come with his family, come be a psychologist there for people, because it's a tough adjustment period for anyone to go move to the Middle East who's not from the Middle East. The idea was, let's get someone down here who can help, with people settling in, etc. And so, that's why we moved there. So
essentially for your dad's work,
my dad's work,
it's a little more complicated.
It's religious related, but it wasn't religious focused, if that makes any sense. And it was a big experiment.
I mean, the
Baha'is
fact that they weren't going around getting people to convert actually made it sound far less culty than what's happening these days. There are various sects of modern popular Christianity that sounds far more cultier than that, unfortunately.
The Baha'i faith in general is pretty mild. It believes in unity of all religions and world peace. Essentially, it's a pretty easy religion to get on board with in general, as far as religion is concerned. but yeah, it would be, I want to just say like, oh, we moved there because for my dad's work, but that's a very dishonest way of putting it because there's no reason for him to go be a psychologist in Israel if it were not for that.
Now I've read the Cliffs Notes, and I appreciate you guys know what Cliff Notes are, because that means we're not
just old enough,
not much older. For those of you that don't know what Cliff Notes are, you should Google it, because us old people have had to use this instead of Wikipedia.
Yeah. It's kind of cheating too, but that's okay.
It's kind of Wikipedia is also kind of cheating. Nowadays it's ChatGPT.
Yeah. But essentially, my brother, I have an older brother who's 4 years older than me, and our family and I don't know, about 10 to 15 other families were all kind of invited to come live in the Baha'i World Center at the same time in the late 80s to early 90s as kind of an experiment to see how family units worked in that environment. Up until that point, there weren't families with young kids. I mean, there was couples, but and after about 10 to 13 years, they decided, maybe like uprooting small children and making them live in the Middle East hasn't been that successful in an experiment. I mean, I was fine. My brother and I turned out all right, but I think there was a lot of people that found that transition difficult. So they kind of like ended that chapter of the Baha'i World Center after us. So when we moved back, essentially it was kind of like, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Like we've decided that, we're moving in a different direction and we're not going to be bringing in families with young kids anymore
Interesting.
For the sake of the family. So
do you think you guys would have still been there?
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. We weren't exactly like kicked out, but essentially I think the way it was put, and again, I was, a young teenager, so I was like barely paying attention to any of this because my world was very self-centered. But I think it was essentially posed to the families of like, hey, we're going to be making like structural changes because when we were living there was all sorts of structural, organizational things in place to cater to families and kids. There was like, the version of Sunday school for Baha'is, or all sorts of events where kids could get together. And the community was relatively isolated, being a community of, international people and a lot of Americans living in the middle of Israel. So like it was a very tight-knit community in that way. It wasn't a closed border community, but everyone kind of tended to stick together because there was familiarity in that sense. And it was catered to the families a lot. And they were basically saying that, like, we're going to be changing things around here. It's not going to end up well for the families. So, like, now would be a good time to go, Now's a good time to move back.
Right. If you want out, here's your chance.
Right. And because the families had structured their, we were there for 13 years, because these families had structured their lives around living there under the assumption that it would be permanently, semi-permanently, it was very harsh transition for people to move back. So it came with some perks in that the Baha'i World Center agreed to pay for both my brother and my undergraduate education anywhere we wanted to go.
Oh, wow. Awesome.
My parents hadn't
they didn't make money, right?
Right. Part of the way they worked at the Baha'i World Center was that they worked for essentially like a family allowance that was given to us by the Baha'i World Center. So
to like sustain yourself while you were there.
Right. So for 13 years, my parents have been out of the job force and didn't have like when they had moved when they were young parents. Yeah, they didn't have a huge nest egg of money or whatever. So we were moving back to the States with essentially like no money. So they're like, hey, we'll make sure your kids get through school, so you don't have to worry about that, and you guys can. Et cetera, et cetera. So that was of great benefit. I guess it's, you live in the Middle East under constant threat of chemical war, and then you get to go to college for free. It's a give and take. But
I mean, I take free college for my kids right now because we're staring down the barrel at three tuitions pretty soon.
And fun fact, Chase learned how to speak Hebrew.
Fluent.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. So, did your parents also had to learn, or was it an optional thing to know how to speak Hebrew?
It was optional because there was no one in the community spoke Hebrew on a structural level or anything like that. Like you
didn't have to.
No, you didn't have to.
Right. The center is in Israel because like so many Judeo-Christian based religions, the Holy Land is just in the Middle East, but it's not a Hebrew or Israeli based religion.
Hence all the fighting.
Yeah, in fact, it's actually an Irani-based religion, so the most foreign language spoken in the Bible Center was Persian. It's a huge Persian community. But my dad is actually sort of like an amateur linguist. He speaks 6 or 7 languages fluently. He picked up Hebrew all right, and my mom did all right too, because we still just lived in Israel. My mom had to go grocery shopping and whatever, and be able to communicate in Hebrew. But really, my brother and I picked it up the best because we went to school. I did K through 3rd grade at an Israeli school, and then in 3rd grade transferred to an American international school because my parents kind of eventually realized that once I was in 3rd grade and couldn't read English yet, they were like, we know at some point.
Chase needs to learn English at some point.
Yeah. So yes, I was a fluent Hebrew speaker up until 3rd grade, and then from 3rd grade on, I rarely spoke it, even though we were living in Israel. My community just really shifted to be, when you're a kid, your community is basically your school community, and I was speaking English at that point, both at home and at school. And on occasion, I knew some local kids and would hang out on occasion. I have to speak Hebrew still, but for the most part, I didn't really speak Hebrew consistently after 3rd grade. So one, you lose your fluency without speaking it. You can understand it still. I could probably watch Israeli news and catch 90% of it.
Eavesdropping on people's conversations.
Yeah, it would be hard. It would be harder for me to speak it fluently after 25 years of not speaking it consistently. But also, even if I could speak it at the level I did then, my vocabulary is still that of a 3rd grader, because that's essentially when I stopped learning.
Yeah, that's how I am. Yeah, my first language was Croatian, and then when I started kindergarten is when I started having to use English.
Well, the difference too is that your parents didn't speak English to you at home either, so it's not like you knew both up until that age.
But yeah, and my language skills stopped. So when as a grown up, when I go to Croatia and I start speaking, they're like, "Oh my gosh, you sound like this little girl!" Like this, I'm stuck at this level of speaking cute.
Right.
Exactly. It's kind of embarrassing, but that's fine.
Exactly. I'd love to pick it back up, and I'm sure as I'm sure is true with you too, Marlene. You'd pick it up very quickly if you started, watching Croatian television and reading stuff.
I mean, the 4 years that we're in Europe, we're in Croatia every winter to renew my residency, and your Croatian came back probably.
Yeah, you just have to immerse yourself back in there. Been. So,
but now, 2 years later,
I'd love to do that and then go back and visit Israel and all my childhood jaunts or whatever, or haunts. But yeah, it's been a little testy over there since we left, so it hasn't been a good reason to go.
Maybe wait a little bit.
Yeah, what year was it when you were there, and was it during relatively safe times?
It was. So we were there from 91 to 2007, 2005 or 6-ish.
Yeah, it had to be a little bit.
Yeah.
So you were there during right through 9/11, which must have had some changes.
Yeah, that was very interesting. I was at the American International School during 9/11, so that colored my experience a little bit in that. So, most of the kids, as you'd imagine, in an American international school abroad are ambassador kids, diplomat kids, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of kids with
military
family.
kids.
Yeah, there's a lot of family in American government and family in military. So obviously that was, the waves of that news coming through the school were very traumatic in that sense, and that there was a lot of kids who had family members were involved in midway in that event. Yeah, personally. But other than that, our experience was very different because it was I hear about what it was like here in the States and kids, in West Virginia, where we moved to when we came back from Israel, or kids in Massachusetts were all pulled out of school. People thought their schools were going to be hit. The level of trauma and panic here stateside was so different than our experience in the Middle East, where we were struggling to get information over the news because it was a footnote. In the news. Because meanwhile, in Israel, there's 5 suicide bombings that day and all sorts of other stuff. And it's in other news, there's something happened in the U.S., there was a bombing or something. And we're like, oh my God, there's a bombing, where we had a little bit better access to information in the school because, like I said, there was kids who had parents in government.
So people don't realize countries outside of your own don't know about news in your country.
Yeah.
You know, but America's so big,
especially
and America's
like
mentality is so much like we're the middle of the universe. Like they think everybody knows, but in reality,
Yeah, and
people
of
don't
course
really care as much.
there are a lot of, obviously Israel is known for the Israelis and the Jews, but there's also a ton of Arab nations and people living within Israel. So there was a little bit of like celebration in the streets from certain communities because obviously death to the West, America's a villain. Not a lot,
especially
of that,
in Jerusalem. Like you're near the the border of the Palestinian territories.
Yeah. Yeah. So there was a little bit of that. But yeah, I remember my friend Alex running through the hallways yelling that they bombed the Pentagon, and I had no idea what the fuck the Pentagon was. I was like, what is the Pentagon?
How do you say that in Hebrew? Explain to me in Hebrew.
Like, all these government buildings are like...
Right. Yeah. My experience, because I moved away from the States when I was 2. Yeah, I didn't even know what the Pentagon was. Yeah, it was a unique experience for sure. But it was probably, it was a minor experience for me. Like I said, it was like, there's some kids upset in school, and like we finished the day at school. Like school didn't even.
We finished the school day, but we all.
Although I'm trying to think about the time, it would have been right at the end of the day anyway. The time zone is so different, but there was a lot of events growing up. We had a whole half year off of school one year because there was a threat of chemical war, and then for the half year that we did come back, we all had to have gas masks with us that we carried with us everywhere to the bathroom and stuff. My upbringing was very unique in terms of the impending threat of violence and war. That 9/11 is almost like a footnote in the series of scary things that happened when I was a kid. But yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, was it when you came back from your sort of childhood in Israel, was it just reverse culture shock massively, like when you came back?
For sure. But I think it helped that our household was, always an American English speaking household, and that we came back for the summers. It would have been insane if we just
That's true.
nonstop.
If you never came back, right?
13 years, and then just all of a sudden came back to the States. And for what it's worth, Israel and Haifa, the city that we lived in, it was very like westernized. Like there's a McDonald's right up for me, etc. But it definitely took. Israeli culture is very to Americans anyway would come across as harsh. It's more like I don't know, like if you're from the Bronx in the 1980s or something, like people argue in friendly ways and people are always like raising their voices and shouting, but that's just sort of like culturally normal there. So I think it took a while to like reassimilate to a somewhat like softer cultural interaction back in the States. But again, also because
it's funny because but Americans in foreign countries are sort of stereotypically known as the ones who are loud. But it is true, like other countries speak much more loudly and more sort of, animated manners than people do in America. In fact, when you compare it to like people from the UK and people from America, all these people from the UK, they come to America and say, the people are so nice. Whereas like the UK is like stern, formal, passive aggressive.
Yeah.
Whereas Americans are always complimenting each other. It's like, wait till you go to Canada. It's gonna blow your mind.
But to answer your question, I think because I was already, like an American child growing up in a foreign country, I became pretty good at like being a chameleon, because I was kind of like straddling two cultural divides my whole childhood. Anyway, so when we moved back, West Virginia, even within the States, is a pretty like stark cultural contrast, like Appalachia, like that's kind of its whole own thing.
Yeah.
But I
it's beautiful.
Take like a fish to water. Oh, it's beautiful for sure. But I'm pretty good at like assimilating culturally like that, because I think I kind of had to as a coping mechanism as a kid anyway. So it's like it's culture shock.
What part of West Virginia were you when you came back?
Morgantown, so the north, and it's a college town.
Okay.
It's like it's not West Virginia, West Virginia. It's like, you know.
Yeah. It's more like Pennsylvania, right?
Yeah,
Are you closer
to
that?
From Pittsburgh. Yeah. But, you know, of course, I went to school. You know, I went to high school there. Tons of my friends are all from the southern part of the state, and we'd take trips and visit around. Like, I got the cultural experience, but literally where I was living was not very, like, you know, it's not the hills and hollers.
Yeah, not West Virginia. You didn't live in a holler.
Yeah.
I mean, we haven't been to West Virginia actually, no, we were just there 2 years ago driving through. But yeah, I think we were near Morgantown because we stayed at like 3 different Best Westerns in Pennsylvania. So I was constantly looking for the next Best Western while we waited for our van to arrive. Ironically, we're here waiting for shipping again. But, you know, this is just going to be, I assume, going to be a norm for our life. But did you go to school? Like, how did you guys meet? Let's maybe shift to Aimee, your background a little bit. Did you guys meet in school? And Aimee, you're from Massachusetts, right?
Yeah, I grew up in Massachusetts. I have a lot of family in Vermont and Rhode Island as well. My parents, you know, I went to the same high school that my dad went to. So very concentrated in the New England area. Chase and I did not meet in school. We went to different schools, but we met in Rhode Island because he was at the Rhode Island School of Design. Oh, cool. I went to Mass Art up in Boston, but I dropped out after a year. So it was a very short-lived college experience. But yeah, we met just through skateboarding in Rhode Island. I was actually dating someone from Atlanta who was a skateboarder. I grew up skateboarding. Chase is a skateboarder. He was dating someone at the time, and like we just became friends and knew of each other and would have limited contact with each other. And then years later, our worlds collided again. I moved back. I had lived down south in Atlanta, and then when that relationship ended, I moved to North Carolina for a year. I was in that weird in between of like, do I want to move home? Like, I don't really want to move home. I can't really afford to like go out on my own and rent a place. I had been living with multiple roommates down in North Carolina and down in Atlanta. And North Carolina was like the middle stopover before I finally committed to moving back home up to Massachusetts. Initially, my plan was to move to San Francisco. So I figured if I could move back home, I could live with my parents for a little while, save some money, move out to California. And then in that time period when I was living at home, Chase and I ran into each other and had many, I mean, you could probably explain this better because you're on a different side of things, but we would come together and hang out a little bit, and then I would sort of disappear for a while. I was very sensitive about starting a new relationship, very resistant to the whole thing after being in a serious relationship for 4 years. So yeah, I can't even like, how long did that period stretch on for? A year and a half?
Yeah, a year and a half, 2 years. Very elusive.
Yeah.
Very elusive.
Like keeping everyone up. I wanted to focus on myself, you know? Just wanted to like be alone
like an
for a little
endangered
while,
trout.
figure out how to like navigate this world, and then eventually Chase he won me over. So
yeah, I was pretty persistent.
Yeah. He was persistent, but also very patient, and respectful, which definitely paid off.
What was your technique, Chase? How did you work this? And maybe more specifically.
That's none of your business, Dan.
But maybe more specifically, like, is your side of the story the same, or is there something from your side that maybe
sad. His is much more sad.
Yeah, no. My side of the story is the same. I was obviously, not that I wasn't interested in working on myself, but I was very motivated. My mom always loves to tell this story at dinner parties or whatever, that within like...
She told this at our wedding.
Yeah, within like a month of meeting Aimee, I told my mom that I was going to marry her. So I was immediately very motivated to like at least start dating Aimee because I wanted to marry her. So
and I was...
Girlfriend seemed like a good place to start. I pursued that very aggressively. And for a while, it seemed like that was what was going to happen. You know, Aimee was interested. We were starting to date, etc. But then she disappeared, like really disappeared. Like we didn't speak for like a year.
Yeah.
I guess the way I approached it was that it felt so important and precious to me. And I'd learned enough at that point in my early 20s through dating to know that like being a sad, desperate boy was not going to get what I wanted, which is how I felt. I felt real sorry for myself, and I felt really bad about the whole thing, and I just really wanted Amy's attention still. But I had learned that like if there was any hope of this working, I was going to have to just like give her space, and if she ever came back around,
you gotta play it cool, right?
Yeah, she would come back around, and that was a very hard thing to do, but I did. I didn't even text you for like a year, and eventually you just texted me.
Of course, yeah. Sometimes you text me and I just wouldn't answer.
Yeah. Well, yeah, like I said, I did that for like a week, and I was like, okay, the writing is on the wall. Yeah, I need to lay off because I can only make this worse. Like all I can do is make myself less appealing to you by being, sad and whiny about the fact and demanding your attention.
It was so not
very
personal.
Mature.
Yeah,
for
like it was
a young Chase full of testosterone and hormones to keep your finger away from the send button.
Yeah. Well, it felt important because, like I said, I had already declared to the universe that we would be together forever. So I knew I couldn't afford to mess it up.
Right.
And like
you have to live that up. Otherwise, your mom would never.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's like why hasn't that story been told in a
I don't know. I guess
film format?
Found the right place to insert.
Just reenactment.
Yeah. But yeah, to go back to like how so if you live anywhere like more than 40 minutes south of Boston, basically the next like cultural center for you is Providence, Rhode Island. Aimee, even though she lived in Massachusetts, lived closer to Providence than Boston.
It's like 15 minutes away. My dad was born in Providence. Most of my family was in Rhode Island.
And Providence is I don't know if people even say this there, but anyone who lives there will tell you it's like the littlest big city in New England. It's like it feels it's got a downtown with some skyscrapers. It feels like kind of a city, but community-wise, it's actually really small and very insular. Everyone kind of knows each other. So like, regardless of why you're in and around Providence, if you're in your 20s, you know everyone else in their 20s anywhere near Providence. So like, I was there going to school.
And like, RISD's there, Brown is there, like some pretty big schools that are pretty renowned, that bring in people from all over.
Right. So there's like the college aspect, but like all of my friends were just local Providence kids. That we like knew through skating, and like Aimee played in bands. Aimee was a musician. She played in punk bands. Skateboarding and punk music go together. So like, there was like all these reasons for us to sort of like run in the same circles, even though we weren't in school together. And that's probably in large part because I was a skateboarder. I think probably a lot of my other peers in college had a much more insular college experience, where most of their peers were just people I went to school with. But because I skate, skateboarders' ears are tuned to other skateboarders. You can't go outside. As soon as you hear the wheels rolling on the sidewalk, you're going over to see like what's going on with that person. So like within a week of moving to Providence and just going out skating the city just to sort of like find my bearings, I had like 10 of my best friends still to this day that I met who were just local skateboarding kids, So yeah, that's how Aimee and I met. It happens that we both went to art school, but we didn't meet at all through an art school connection or anything. It was through skating and music and just sort of like general youth culture.
Yeah, and really, I guess my boyfriend at the time, when he moved up to Massachusetts to live with me, I introduced him to all of the skateboarder friends in Providence, so that he would have a community of friends to skate with as well. So that was like where all that crossover came from.
Yeah. But like, the people that I ended up being friends with initially all already knew you before her ex-boyfriend Bo had moved here. And like, I skated with Bo, but some of my other friends were like trying to date you when you guys were teenagers and you were working at the mall or whatever. Like everyone just like knew everyone.
Everyone is very much in everyone's business there, which is both a detriment. It creates a very strong community. The music community in Providence is very, very strong, and there's a lot of like alternative music happening there as well. So, it's.
What instrument did you play?
A special little place. What was that?
What instrument did you play? Or do you play?
Mostly played bass. I sang in some bands, which is mostly just.
I think
yelling.
I've seen some photos.
Yeah.
Right? Hasn't there been some photos floating around? Yeah, we've been to Providence. In fact, I found the Roger Williams like National Park visitor center was in like this really strange location that I want to say, at least when we were there, it was on an island in the middle of the road, and there were just like a building, and you go in there to like get your.
I remember a statue, a big statue of it.
It was so weird. Maybe that's the only Rhode Island is so small. Maybe that's the only place that had extra space to make another office.
Bigger than wherever. Yeah. It's a weird little place. I mean, I miss it. I miss it so much because of the food. Really, that's like.
Really?
Yeah, the food there.
Yeah, I mean, I loved Providence. Providence is like the perfect city for me. But I mean, I don't know. Maybe part of that's just because I lived there in my early 20s, and like everywhere has rules when you're in your early 20s because you've got like friends and you're
right.
best, you know. But
right. It was
being an outdoor person, an introverted person, cities, in general just kind of freak me out. But it was like just the right combination of like small enough that like the actual city part of it was very small, and you could like enter and exit it easily at will, and the rest of the neighborhood surrounding it were quiet, and the community was small, and like if I had to live in a city anywhere, like that was the perfect type of scenario for me. For all the people who like grew up there, most people hate it because everyone's in everyone's business. It's so small, they all want to move away to New York or Boston or California and like get the hell out of Providence. But I thought it was perfect.
Rhode Island's basically just two cities, right? It's like Providence or Newport.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I'm sure there's other communities in between, but so small. Yeah. I feel like in the show Yellowstone, they mentioned several times that John Dutton's ranch is the size of Rhode Island. I mean, it literally is like the size of one person's property.
Yeah, Rhode Island is like
massive.
Measurement.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Rhode Island and Delaware.
Right. Is it bigger or smaller than Rhode Island? You both of you guys happened to go to art school, but it's not a coincidence then that you guys met because you ran in the same circles in the same area. Yeah. But what did you guys study what you guys are doing now, photography, filmmaking, or did you guys study a wider range of the arts?
I went into, so Mass Art is one of the very few public art schools. So because of that designation, the curriculum's a little bit different. And also your first year is a foundation year, which is true at most art schools. I went in on a photography with the intention of having a photography degree. But my first year, I'm doing 3D classes, drawing classes. I had to do a writing class. My teacher was German. She didn't speak very good English. She just loaded us with crazy writing assignments. I barely had time to do the art portions because I had so many writing assignments, just so many essays, so many book report style things. So I had to take, and would have if I progressed, taken a math and a science. They offered astronomy as a science class. So it was a little bit different than a traditional art school. But my first year, I went in with photography as my focus. I was in a class, and because of the way that Mass Art operates, there's this thing called the Colleges of the Fenway. So Northeastern, I think Emerson, all of the surrounding schools, you can take classes and cross over. So my first photo class at Mass Art in my major, I was in a class with kids who had never loaded film in a camera. At this point, all I shoot is film. I've never shot digital up to this point. So for me, it definitely put a little bit of a weird damper on my first year of college because the whole point really was to be in classes with peers who are on the same level so that we could be challenging each other and, doing these things. But unfortunately, I was in a class with kids who mostly had never taken photos, loaded film, used a film camera before. So it was high school for me all over again. I was very arts focused in high school as well. I was a teacher's assistant, so I used to mix all the darkroom chemicals for my teacher because he didn't have a photo background. I would help assist the kids in the darkroom. So as I got older, my senior year, I dropped my math and science and just did arts and free periods. So I had more time to do photography work. So my first year at college was a little bit of a bummer, and it sort of helped me to make a decision to not come back, which maybe was good, maybe wasn't good. I don't know. You know, like I could be in a totally different place in my life at this point if I had stayed in college, and maybe I wouldn't be doing photography. I have no idea. But
maybe we wouldn't be married.
Yeah, I might not be married. So, you know,
or maybe you would have saved Chase a year of heartache. You would have met him. He wouldn't have ran away.
I think ultimately, though, for me, the realization was that college felt just like high school all over again, which is what I was trying to get away from.
Yeah.
Like, high school was fine for me.
That sounds like you had a pretty cool high school experience, though.
Yeah, high school wasn't like where I wanted to be at that point. Like, I wanted to get as far away from high school as I could. And I think I really would have benefited from having a couple years of just working and living right after high school before making a decision to go into college. But during that time, you were really pushed into the college thing. Like, if you weren't going to college, you were going to be nothing. And it was, everything in school was set up to get you there. My parents actually were very supportive of going into the arts, but also were kind of on the sidelines saying quietly, because they didn't want to tell their kids don't go to college. They were like, you don't have to go to school for art. Like, you could apprentice, you could like do all these things, but they didn't want to push that too hard. But both of my parents are very creative. My mom is an incredible illustrator. She worked in the jewelry field. So like, they have an arts background and are creative people, and they were looking at it from their perspective, thinking like, you don't have to spend all this money, like you could just learn and then like go into this field. But they didn't want to push their kids to not go to college. So I went, and then I left. But I still found my way to photography. It certainly like undulated quite a bit. I always had a camera with me, but once I left college, and even through high school into college, I was photographing a lot of punk shows, house shows, skateboarding, just city scenes, walking around the city with friends, just like basically life as it was happening around me is what I was documenting, and learning how to print and develop my own film and do all that kind of stuff. So I always had a camera. There were just periods of my life where I was really into it, and then I would sort of pull away and then find my way back to it. And it just sort of went like that for a long time until I met Chase, really. I had to buy a digital camera my first year of college, which I was very unhappy about. I was like, why would I buy a digital camera? I don't want to do this. But I had to for the classes I was going to take. That camera, once I left, sat in a closet for, 5 years. And then Chase, when we started dating, I was still shooting film, and we had been talking about, maybe there would be some benefit to picking up a digital camera because you get that instant feedback. It could just be used as a tool to learn and grow in your craft. And I was like, maybe you have a point, but like, not me. I don't do that. I don't do digital photography. Eventually I started messing with the digital camera a little bit more, but really what kind of accelerated the whole thing was the realization that I could potentially shoot weddings and make money. I had never figured out, like, how do you actually make money taking pictures? Like, that was never on my radar. It was just like, this is just what I do. Like, this is how I exist in the world. I take pictures. I don't know how people make money doing that. I don't have that figured out. I'll probably never get paid to take pictures. And then the wedding industry, like, I had a friend who was shooting weddings, and that's all he did. He didn't have to work for someone else. And he was very young, like quite a few years younger than me, and having great success. So he sort of mentored me in that process, and I started booking weddings, bought a nicer digital camera, and then through shooting weddings was actually able to leave my job. I was working in horticulture, working with plants and landscaping, and I love plants and that whole world. But that's what, like, the digital photography actually opened up the door to work for myself and pushed that.
What was that first digital camera? Because digital cameras were pretty horrible back in those days. So I'm not surprised that when you got your first one, you weren't impressed.
Well, I mean, it was a Nikon D80, which wasn't a bad camera. I remember being like,
I'm thinking more about my early experience. It
wasn't like a cyber shot, like point and shoot, which I had that kind of stuff. But yeah, the D80, because it was for school, it had to be like a certain caliber with like manual functions, which I was like, just shoot film. Like, you don't need to buy a digital camera. So you got manual functions on a film camera. But you know, it wasn't a bad camera. It was perfectly like good for its purpose. I was just very resistant to the idea of the digital.
Yeah, but now you shoot on Canon, right? Or you're still on Nikon?
No, I shoot on Canon.
What was your first film camera?
My first film camera, and I might get the number wrong, it was a Minolta. I still have it, but it's in North Carolina at my parents' house. It's a Minolta SRT, I think it's a 101 maybe. It's a super basic 35 millimeter SLR. I think it was given to me by my aunt and uncle, like the camera that they had passed down to me, and I was in 7th grade when they gave me that camera.
Cool.
And I shot everything on that camera. I never had another lens, and I never had another camera body. My college portfolio was shot on slide film with that camera. Like that is how I got into school. Like everything was done on that camera, and I didn't purchase another camera until pretty much till right before Chase and I started dating. It was when I bought. Well, I had bought some cheaper cameras.
What was the focal length of that lens you had?
Honestly, don't even know. I was so not a gear person. Like I just was given this camera and that's all I had. I mean, it was pretty. I want to say it might have been like a 50 millimeter.
50 maybe, right? Because that's probably the most ubiquitous.
Yeah, that's like my. I would guess that it was probably in the 50 range. But yeah, I just didn't even think about, I could buy different lenses for this.
This thing comes off?
It was just like, later. This is it, and this is what I do with it, and that's, and it's changed quite a bit now.
I mean, that probably forced you to be even more creative, having limited gear, limited equipment, and having to do different things with what you had. Because I think a lot of people fall into the trap of like, if I want to do that, I have to get this these days.
Yeah.
Whereas just kind of figure out what you can do with what you have, and not just in cameras, just I think in gear in general.
Yeah,
and I mean, may not be.
I didn't shoot color film for a very long time. Like I only shot black and white because I could develop it myself. So like it was one lens, one camera body, one film stock. Like it was super limited, and just for how many years? That's all I really shot. I'd occasionally pick up like a disposable camera or something. I wasn't like super regimented, but that was the one tool I had, and I just learned that camera very thoroughly.
So were you just trying to find access to a darkroom at an early age, like everywhere you could, or is it mostly like at the high school?
It was mostly at the high schools when I first got access to it. I would develop my own film, at home in my closet,
like
and
in your
I had
closet?
that whole process,
awesome.
of like loading and loading.
I had roommates that grew mushrooms in my closet, but that's a different.
We went to
a different school.
But high school was really the first time, and like the darkroom was so ancient, so there was a lot of like figuring out how to get things working again. But that was super rewarding in itself, and just like really like being the person that goes in to mix the chemicals for like my peers in school was kind of a neat thing and dynamic to have with my art teacher. Like there's just a lot of trust, and I was able to take all these free periods and just hang out in the darkroom alone, printing my own work and like, learning what that process was. And then from there, obviously I went to college. My time in the darkroom was super limited because of the way that class was structured. My teacher was actually having to give me separate assignments to challenge me, and then like she would be like my only critique. Like it divided me from my peers at that point, and it just was not great. It was very isolating, which was the opposite of what you want.
Have you talked to, or are you still friends with anybody that you met during their first year at Mass Art? And if you have, like, have they given you a different perspective on what the subsequent years would have been like?
I do keep in touch with some people. A friend of mine ended up going to Mass Art, a good friend of mine who I knew from middle school and high school. ended up going to Mass Art, but not for photography. And like he completed his degree. He's a tattoo artist now, an incredible artist. But I did meet my first year. Because of the class I was in, I wasn't like in a class with a bunch of other photo kids. So I don't have a lot of photographer friends from that first year, but I have older friends who were a little bit farther along at Mass Art, who were like juniors and seniors, ceramics folks, printmakers. I actually spent a lot of time in the printmaking lab when I was there. I was very into printmaking and was thinking about double majoring. So I hung around a lot of printmakers, and then another woman who is a tapestry weaver. She was in textiles. All of the people who I befriended are incredibly successful artists. And it's been very cool to see how well they've done and how well their work is received. And, part of me is like, I think I would have certainly benefited from a lot of the aspects.
I think you would maybe had success, but maybe a different kind of success.
It could have been very different.
The kind of stuff you guys are doing now.
When I first applied to get into college on a photography portfolio, I thought I would go into fashion. I thought I was going to go to New York. I got into Pratt. I was looking at Parsons. Like I was considering that trajectory because most of the people I knew in photography at that point.
Fashion photography or fashion, like designing garments.
Fashion photography. But then when I got into Mass Art, like you're in this foundation year, you're still trying to figure out what you're doing, where you're going, whatever. It was much less fashion focused than a New York school in terms of the photography program. But I still thought that might be the direction I would go. But then everything sort of fell apart after I left. And I actually did reapply to school at Mass Art. I reapplied as a double major for printmaking and photography.
Well, you have to reapply to get back in.
Oh yeah, full portfolio.
That's interesting. I don't think our school would have just let us back in.
I think they were going to use the same credits that I had. Like they were going to apply the credits, but I had to fully reapply application portfolio. Oh, wow. And I was living down in Georgia at the time, and it was probably like 3 years after I had left. Got in, was going to double major, and then I wanted to also get into textiles and blacksmithing and all these different things. And I went to meet with my counselor to sign my loan papers. And I sat down with him, and he was asking me like, what do you intend to do? Like, how do you envision this experience going? And I explained
get a job at Colonial Williamsburg as a blacksmith.
It's like, well, I'm going to double major. I want to do this. I want to do this. I want to do blacksmithing. I want to get into textiles. I want to learn how to weave. And he was just like, you're here to use the facility more than to like learn, like, I mean, you're here to learn, but like, it's clear to me that you're highly motivated and that you're wanting to do a lot of different things. Like, have you thought about apprenticing? Have you thought about going different directions here? And the biggest takeaway from that meeting was that he said, I don't think this is the right path for you. And I left that office without signing my loan.
They talked you out of it.
He talked me out of it. For better or for worse, but at the time, I was looking at a $60,000 loan to dump on top of the other loan I already had from that first year.
Yeah, right.
And he just kind of felt like, I think there's other ways you can do this that would actually be more beneficial to you.
Yeah, and for reference, Aimee's 1 year of college in 2007, we just paid off that loan
last December.
So.
Oh my God.
So, three times more of that. Yeah,
So I heard about this semi-cultish thing in Israel that you could have joined that would have paid for your school.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just thinking about that. I never really thought about it in these terms, but you're asking if we both ended up doing after college what we signed up for in college. Yeah. And Aimee's talking about how she dropped out, and I'm thinking like, yeah, it never really even occurred to me to drop out, but of course it didn't occur to me to drop out because there was no stakes because college was a free ride for me.
Right.
You show up.
You better take that.
Why not?
Take that.
There was no added pressure like, am I doing the right thing? What is this going to cost me in the future? It didn't matter.
To be honest, though,
I mean, this gets into a bigger. This gets to a bigger conversation just about public education in the U.S. as a whole, right? Like, if everybody had the opportunity Chase had as somebody who is going to get their school paid for, then there is no pressure. There doesn't have to be this, I have to either do this or do that. But if you can also go to school and do something after school, you can do both without this added pressure of what I do with this money. And it's crazy that, what is this? 17 years later, you're finally paying off the 1 year of school. I mean, that's just insane.
Yeah. It's slightly horrifying. And honestly, like when you're getting out of high school, you're so young. Like personally for me, and maybe that's different now, but I couldn't really grasp what that meant in terms of signing these loans, that amount of money, how long that would take to pay back. Like you don't really understand any of that.
Yeah.
Like this is
it probably felt like free money at the time. Right?
Yeah, right. And like you just go into the program and like most people complete their degree and they come out and they have a degree, and the whole idea was you have this degree, you get this high paying job. But like we've seen that didn't really pan out for most people. So there's a lot of conflicted feelings.
And Mass Art is probably cheaper than RISD.
School. Because it was a public school and I was a Massachusetts resident, the tuition itself
you got the discounted rate.
For the year, it was super affordable. It was the housing that was double, almost triple that. And you just don't have like a good grasp on financial stuff at that age. I graduated when I was 17. Like you're just, I don't know. You're just kind of you're going with the flow.
Yeah.
You don't really like.
Yeah, our good friends that we went to college with, they have a kid who's a year older than Ava, so she's graduating this month, basically. And she got accepted to UC Davis, and I think she was going to UC Davis, and they were telling us how much it's going to cost for 4 years. And what did it say?
It's also a public school.
It's also a public school, California public school, and they're California residents. And it's Davis versus like LA or Santa Barbara, which is where we went to school. And for 4 years, it was going to cost $200,000 for in-state resident to go to a public school.
That's so crazy.
In Davis, and Davis is like 10 miles away from Woodland, right? So that's not like a necessarily expensive place to live in California, and that's still going to cost that much. So
when I was at RISD.
RISD's like one of the most expensive art schools in the country.
Well over a decade ago, it was $250,000 for a 4-year degree. I'm sure it's up there. Probably close to half.
Now an in-state public school is like, same price basically.
Yeah, and it's an art school, so famously a useless degree for a lot of people. You know what I mean? It's a lot of money to shell over.
Well, let's hope Ava doesn't listen to this episode, because that's where she wants to go to an art school.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the one thing I want to circle back to is that I do feel like I wish I could go to school now. And maybe one day I will.
Yeah.
We say that a lot too.
We say the same.
A lot of benefit, like the way that Chase can talk about his art compared to the way that I can talk about my art. Sure, I could like teach myself and I could learn, but there's just
it would be unfair for the kids that are in
foundation.
our class if we were in school right now.
I do feel like there's it's totally valid to want to go to art school. I think there's incredible benefits from it too. I would never like discourage someone from doing it. I think you just really got to think it through. Make sure
That's
it's the
why
right.
I don't want to discourage her, but I just want to make sure she realizes the cost and the impact it'll have financially. But we also have the opportunity for her to go to school in other countries that would be practically free, but we haven't totally ruled that out. But on the other hand, it has to be her decision, just like it was your decisions when you go to school, whether or not go to school. Like your parents have to support you in ways that they can.
Yeah. I mean, I think in general, I'm super grateful for the experiences I had in college. Those aren't all related to schooling. I think it was the most important thing for me was just being around people my age who were doing the same thing, and college provided a vessel for that. It doesn't have to. You can have an experience like that in your late teens, early 20s, just within your community, but college certainly provided that structure. And I think the foundational, as an art maker of some kind, like those foundational skills are important that you learn. I think I tell people this all the time. One of the most valuable things was just like having critique amongst peers. Just having other people to look at your work and dissect your work and talk about your work, and for you to do that with somebody else, I think going forward in your life as an artist, that's just an important skill to have. But people ask us all the time, young kids who see us now as, I don't know, influencers or people who are like making a living out there on the internet, you know, they go, hey, should I go to college? Like, should I go to school if I want to do what you guys are doing? How do we get to where you're at? And we tell them all the time that, like, yeah, I think college is a valuable experience. You could certainly go to college, but nowadays, more than ever,
you can learn a lot.
When we went to college, like, it was the only way to learn the type of stuff we wanted to learn. In that way. Nowadays, like, I mean, it's a joke YouTube university, but literally
you can learn a lot.
From a foundational skills perspective, you can learn anything online. I mean, it's insane, you know? So, like, the pressure to have to go to college isn't the same as it was when we were at college age.
It depends so much on the individual person, I think, and how you learn to, like, hands-on, being out in the field, doing the thing, especially with photography, is so important. Having teachers who can teach and critique and things like that, like, there's so many different pieces, and I think it really depends on individual, like what works best.
But
for
I mean,
them.
some things never change. Like, you know, for me, I went to a public university in California, but I majored in art, so in that sense, I didn't go to an art school, but I studied art studio at a normal, like, state school. So my experience is maybe similar to your first year experience, Aimee, in that I had to take a lot of sort of general ed, right? I had to take a whole bunch of different stuff before I could get into more of the upper division art classes. And in fact, my first photography class, I think it was either second or third year, I could only get into upper division photography, and my professor was this fairly well-known photojournalist in the area in LA. His name was Richard Ross, and he was known as being like super hard ass, like tough on the students. First thing he said in class was like, if you don't own a camera and have not taken photos before, you should just leave now.
Yeah.
And I felt like he was speaking to me because I had very little experience then. But I'm like, okay, I got to fake it till I make it.
Yeah, you just gotta go for it.
Yeah. So, I was one of those other kids in your first photography class. I mean, I had loaded films before, but that's because we grew up in, a decade and a half earlier than you guys, where loading film was the only way to capture any kind of photograph, right?
Yeah.
So, but from that, though, some of those...
I feel like... I want to say I wasn't like angry at those kids for not knowing how to load film.
Why were you mad at Dan?
They weren't art kids.
No, you were just at a different level, so you weren't going to get much out of it.
Well, but they weren't even going, and not like, they weren't even going to art school. Like, they were at totally different schools. Like, they had never like taken a picture before. Like, it was like you could not know how to load film. Like, that's totally fine, and like you can learn that pretty quickly. But it was like, hey, this is like a fun extracurricular, like.
Yeah.
Like there's it's like when background, which also totally fine, but maybe don't make that like the foundation year of a photography major's first college experience. I feel like that's questionable.
So, you should have been in the class with Richard Ross, and then those guys would have left, right? Then you'd be in the class that you want to be. So I mean that. But what I was trying to say is like some of these things that you learn doesn't really change over the years. For example, like the foundations of like how to operate a camera, composition and lighting and all this stuff stays the same. The gear might change. All of that stuff stays the same. But the stuff that you learn out of school are the things that kind of make you better and better, that layers up on top of that existing knowledge. But the other thing that can be tricky too now, though, is because you can't learn so much on YouTube, but you also have to be kind of discerning on what information you take in, because you could learn some really bad habits.
Yeah.
And just go down, a dead end road.
Right. Yeah. I guess that's like the great benefit of schooling in general, is just how information is curated. I guess that's the job of a good teacher.
Some guidance. You get a lot of guidance.
Yeah, this is all the information that exists about photography in the world.
And how can we distill it?
I'm going to distill it down to what I think you need to know as a young photographer going forward. I mean, that's the mark of a good teacher. Point is, there's a lot of good teachers online. There's people like that who have YouTube channels, but you are then
you have to
decide.
It, yeah.
You don't have a given
You have
curriculum.
to filter it
you
out.
choose between 3 classes, and they're all going to be good for you. You got 100 classes, and a lot of them are junk, and you got to find your way. So that is definitely more complicated. It's funny your story about Professor Ross. I feel like that's like an art teacher archetype of some kind, because there were definitely people like that at RISD also.
Yeah.
And I remember distinctly freshman year, several kids on the first critique erupting in tears and dropping out of college and never coming back. I mean, like, they got through one class.
that was Ross's goal. That's what he wanted. He thrived on that.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. I mean, I'm sure it's just the way he was mentored and the way his mentor was mentored before him, was to, like, really tear people apart. But I mean, the kids just got eviscerated, to a hurtful level.
Look at like how much the landscape has changed in the art world, though. Like, art, if you were going to college for art, like, it's a cutthroat industry. It was hard to break into the art world in any shape of your art, but now it's so much more accessible. Like, everyone's a photographer, like, it's so accessible.
Whether they are or not, they say that.
Like, it's just kind of blown everything wide open. It's such a different experience. I'm sure Professor Ross is somewhat mortified at the state of
probably, but maybe he was just as mortified when I stayed in, and he was none the wiser until the very end of the class. The last week of class, I told him, you told people like me to leave at the beginning.
Oh, you did? You confronted him?
Yeah, I told him at the end. So, like, remember that? Like, you told me that I should have left, but I ended up getting an A, and he had no idea that I was faking it for those first couple weeks. So that was. That was my
validating.
That was my little pat on my own back, right? That made me feel better. That if you wanted it bad enough, if you wanted to learn something, you can do it. People can come in, having had some experience, but maybe didn't want it as bad, right? Or maybe that people came in with a lot of experience and maybe thought this class was like, beneath them. But it's really about the people that are in the class who want to do, what they're doing. And I think, in a sense, like you said, he was probably mortified that, like, okay, he failed at scaring all the noobs away. But maybe he felt a sense of accomplishment, too, that he turned somebody who was sort of a noob into somebody who was going to do this for, the rest of his life. Maybe that's
more of what they're going for. It's not so much about, like, never taken photo, you can't be here. It's like, we just scare away the people who are not going to be willing to put in the work. Like, if you're not going to be here to work, like, get out of the class.
I mean, they're trying to set the right expectations, right? It's like, if you don't know, maybe I wasn't even the first one that's done this. I'm sure I'm not the first one who's done this, right? And also, like, when we went to school, like, classes are so hard to get into. I think it's even worse now. Like, you can't get into the classes that you want. So you have to pick classes that, like, maybe your second or third or fourth choice. And then once you got in, like, you can't just drop out, because that means you're not taking a full load this year.
Yeah.
So you gotta stay in there. But yeah, I mean, I remember, like, spending an ungodly amount of money. Like, I also shot chrome. I shot Fuji chrome, Kodachrome during that quarter. And it was like going in to Sam's Camera, which is our local camera shop in Southern California, and, like, walking out with, like, 2 bricks of film and an empty bank account. And I'm not even done. This is just how you start.
Nothing has changed. I just spent so much money on film for this Alaska
project. Maybe it's even worse, right? It's got to be worse now.
It is so crazy. So crazy.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, how were you able to afford back then?
I was shooting a lot. Well, I wasn't shooting a lot less. I was shooting 35, which, you get a lot of exposures, and it was also, like, so much cheaper back then. And I was developing it myself, and then often printing it myself. So, like, buying chemicals and paper. Paper's expensive, but, like, in the long run, so much cheaper. Like, getting a digital scan was, like, not a thing. Like, if you sent it out to get developed, you just got 4x6 prints or whatever, and then all your negatives back.
Yeah.
So that transition was definitely weird when I started getting scans. But then, yeah, the cost of scanning, the cost of film, mailing it in, developing, like, it's such a different experience. Now I miss having access to a darkroom quite a bit. I miss the tactile nature of like being in a darkroom printing, having a physical print on this beautiful paper. But I think it's something that I will find my way back to. Obviously, in the truck, it's a little more challenging. When we first got on the road and we filmed Journey On, my goal, I was shooting only film at that point, and I was developing on the road, which ended up being really challenging. It ended up that most of the time, the running water was the issue. In the Westie, we didn't have a sink and we didn't have running water, so we just had like a little gallon water jug, which, you know, if anyone's familiar with developing your own film, like the water stuff is pretty important. Running water, rinsing, the whole developing process is very dependent on water, so that made that very challenging. So I would develop mass quantities of film when we were like at a family member's house visiting. So that was my first foray into like carrying a bunch of chemicals in the van and trying to do that whole thing. Realized it might not be super sustainable for us once we moved in full time. So that's when, you start sending out all your work to be scanned and whatnot. But I think when we have a place, maybe one day, hopefully, it's very unclear what the future may hold, I would love to get back into the whole darkroom thing and have a enlarger and be able to develop again.
And to quickly answer your question from my side, yes, I did get a degree in filmmaking. It doesn't. I don't think it says that on the.
I was gonna get back to you. So perfect.
We talk a lot.
Thank you for.
It just says Bachelor's of Fine Arts. I don't think it specifies what my major was, but I made that transition after my foundation year. So at RISD, and similar in a lot of art schools, I don't know if it's exactly like this, but you don't declare a major until your second year of college. So first year is a foundation year where you take all sorts of generalist art classes. I think the idea is to get everyone sort of on a similar level and to expose you to a lot of different things so you can make a good choice about what you want to major in. Obviously, everyone who goes to art school probably goes in with a certain niche or a certain thing that they're already interested in, that they're planning to, but there was tons of kids, at least in my year, who discovered some new love for something in their foundation year that they had no idea because they'd never been exposed to, and ended up majoring in that even though they had planned to do something else. But
I mean, honestly, like 17, 18-year-olds don't really know. Usually, not everybody's like Aimee. We didn't really know what we wanted to do with our lives.
Well, like, you know, where'd all the glass blowers come from? Who's blowing glass in high school?
Right, exactly.
So, like, unless you're exposed to it, you're like, this is a thing. Wow.
When I entered the college, it was with a illustration portfolio. I thought from when I was like 6 years old and realized that I was like a little bit better at drawing than my peers, that I would be, a fine arts specialist, an illustrator, painter of some kind. And I still, maintain that practice today. Obviously, some people know of us through my fish illustrations, scientific illustrations. But, I had an illustration-based portfolio, got into RISD. All through foundation year, I was pretty convinced that I was still going to go into illustration or maybe into painting. But at the time, from like middle school onwards, when I really started skating in a serious way, my dad's kind of a gearhead, so he was the dad. I was the kid whose dad had a camera. And a huge part of skateboarding culture is documenting skateboarding and filming yourself skateboarding.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, I ended up being sort of like the designated filmer because my dad had a camera, but also because I was sort of an artsy-fartsy person, I had a good eye for composition, and I took to that very quickly, that like I enjoyed the act of like filming and putting it together into videos and getting good shots and whatever. That progressed from like middle school onwards to the point where I was in college. I was not only skateboarding at like a semi-professional level, but also all my friends were, and my videography skills were at a semi-professional level to the point where they were transitioning into a professional level. I was filming pro skaters while I was in college. So I had this sort of like double life of like in school, I'm illustrating, and then like as soon as I get out of class till 2 a.m, I'm out filming pro skaters around the East Coast, doing this skateboard filmmaking thing. And I got the impression, there's a lot of like buzz when you're in college about like what degree is going to be useful for you out in the world in art school. It seems like there's kind of like a general existential angst about that.
I feel like when I was in school, it was like graphic design.
Right.
Like you only do that.
And basically, it's like if you want to be a fine artist,
if you want to get a job.
Good luck if you're going to be an illustrator. Like, what are you going to illustrate? Kids' books or something? It was like, go into graphic design or kill yourself, basically, was the option. Or, of course, there was talk about, like, the film industry, like photographers, videographers, and graphic designers. There's like a given niche. Like, we know where you go outside of school. Like, illustrator, pottery major, painter. Like, there's the gallery scene if you're good enough, but if not, blah, blah, blah. So I definitely, I tried to make this conscious choice where I was like, well, I'm already like using cameras a lot. Maybe I should just like do the like responsible thing and like just major in filmmaking because it'll be better for me when I get out. It ended up not being the case. Like I made that decision thinking I was making some like big brain adult decision. But I was 18 years old. Like I didn't know shit, in the end, it probably was just easier for me to like consolidate my like current interests, which like I was still interested in illustration, but I was like really interested in making skateboard videos, so I was like, oh dude, I can get access to like 16mm film cameras to like use in my skate videos. Like I'm doing that,
Yeah. Were you guys shooting video cameras like Sony VX2000s, or are you guys shooting on digital?
Yeah, so I had a Sony VX1000, the predecessor to the 2000, with Century optics, depth lens, fisheye on the front of it. I went through like 4 of those cameras because I smashed them all to bits, obviously, filming skateboarding. But what's interesting about RISD, and I don't think that this is necessarily typical, and now they may have phased this out of RISD completely, and because it's becoming even more obsolete. But at the time, I think it was still kind of unique. So after foundation year, then you've got 3 years in your major, or if you're an architect, another 4 years in your major. But the first year of the film animation video department, you were not allowed to shoot on digital. You had to shoot everything mandatory
that's
on
cool.
16mm film, or I don't know if you could somehow afford it. Maybe there was 35mm cameras, but I think it was mostly all just 16mm cameras. And then we had to edit on a machine called a Steenbeck editing suite, a giant reel-to-reel machine with a projection screen on it that shows you what's running through the film, and you had to cut and splice and tape your film to edit your project. Yeah, with razors, and same thing for the audio too. It was on magnetic tape, reel-to-reel. You had to edit audio and video. I mean, it was like really, really back to basics, which at the time, this is only the late 20-aughts, like there was no need to have to edit this way. We had full digital editing, Premiere Pro, Final Cut Pro.
It made sense when you had to do it this way to learn it.
Right. At the time, the department heads were convinced that like this was the best way to gain a foundation in what it meant to make movies, because all the tools that you use in digital editing suites are basically mimicking these things. So like, why not just get the thing? It'll make you a better filmmaker, whatever. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that made me a better filmmaker or not, but I was very grateful for the experience because it's unique. And I don't think that, RISD probably got, at this point, they're probably past that. I'm sure they probably phased out all machines. But yeah, we got access to like nice, at the time, state-of-the-art HD cameras by the second year of our major, et cetera. A lot of kids decided to just continue shooting because they enjoyed that process. But yeah, first year it was like you are not allowed to edit anything on your computer. Like you have to do it analog the whole way, which was kind of cool.
I mean, back in the early days too, though, it was kind of painful to edit on a computer because the computers weren't fast enough to handle it. You were using, this is before, I'm assuming this is before like the whole like Adobe CS suite, right? It was like Premiere 6 or Premiere 7 or something. Yeah. And they were dogs. I mean, those pieces of software were dogs. Yeah. It was bad. But,
absolutely.
In retrospect, that gave you some grit.
Yeah.
Right? So I feel like they probably maybe got away from requiring that, but also I think it's a bit of a disservice to the kids to not get access to it, because I'm sure there are kids that would love to have that experience.
Yeah, it was really, really cool. Like I said, I was grateful for it. I don't know if the lofty ideals of like this is the best way to get a foundation in filmmaking for the modern world is relevant anymore. But I'm so grateful the experience was so cool, and that they like took the time to like maintain those machines and run all that. Because like I said, I think at the time there may have been some schools that had Steam decks, but that was kind of unique to RISD's film program. Because these are ancient
maybe
pieces
like
of
some places in LA where like maybe USC or UCLA.
Yeah, totally.
Like dedicated film schools.
Yeah.
But for an art school with a film program, maybe not. Maybe that's pretty unique.
Yeah. And also to say at RISD, we did not have like STEM or humanities requirements the way Mass Art did. Yeah, it was a very.
I mean, you can do whatever you want as a private school, basically, right?
Yeah, we did have required liberal arts credits, so there were a lot of like English classes we had to take, but outside of that, there was you didn't have to meet any like requirements.
I mean, like I said, Mass Art, astronomy was the science option.
Yeah. I think there was option. There was option to take the math classes and whatever. They were not required. They could just be
at least
part
it's
of
astronomy, not astrology. Could have been astrology.
There was crazy class. One of the craziest classes as an elective I took at RISD was how to make holograms with lasers. There was cool stuff at that school.
Wow! Yeah. Like in chunks of glass.
Yeah, it was in like a film like emulsion, but some sort of a special film emulsion that can get that 3-dimensional development within it to make the hologram.
Oh, I see.
It's like a series of mirrors with lasers, and the whole thing had to float on top of like air-filled medicine balls, like sports balls with giant concrete blocks on top, because any vibration to the molecular level, so like just the vibration of the building of footsteps down the hall would mess up the hologram. It was crazy. It was
very, very practical for life.
It was a very cool class.
I mean, you could have a chain of like stores across all the malls selling photos of your loved ones in 3D.
It's crazy. Yeah, it was cool. Yeah, it was on a clear film emulsion, and the only way to view it was with laser light again. So like it would develop the image into it. But it wasn't like you'd have to put some sort of a backing on it, I think, for it to work in normal light, like if you had a holographic card or something.
When we went to college,
they were translucent.
When we went to college in the late 90s, the highest end 3D technology we had were those posters where you have to make your eyes cross.
Yeah, a shark jumps out.
A dinosaur jumps out at you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. We're high tech.
We're old. And that was part 1 of our interview with Chase and Aimee of Tight Loops.
As I promised, it was a very interesting conversation. There's a lot to learn about these two people. And in fact, there's so many things that we had to skip because we knew that there was a lot to talk about and we couldn't get into all of it. So if you guys are interested for more, stay tuned for part 2. In part 2, we will talk a lot more about sort of the things that they're currently doing and their experiences traveling on the road and their experiences being filmmakers and photographers. So I hope you guys enjoyed this first part. And thanks as always for listening to our podcast. And we'll talk to you guys in the next one.
Bye.